Hello everyone, my name is Alex, and this is Zombie Side Up. Today we are going to be sculpting Gila from 10 Hun TCG. So here is the finished sculpture. Normally I don't show the finished sculpture right off the bat. Today's video is going to be different, and that is why I'm showing it. Because I did not record the process of sculpting this guy. Instead, I took pictures throughout the process, and I'm just going to be briefly explaining each one. Sometimes I like to make sculptures as more personal projects as opposed to recording videos with them, just because videos add hours onto the time of making a sculpture, and I don't make any money from the videos. So if I do want to record a video, I really only do it if I'm really inspired to. And so anyways, this one I just wanted to focus on the sculpture, not having to record videos. As you can see, this is by far my most detailed piece I've ever made. The paint job and the sculpt go together very nicely. And just going all the way around, you can see the details wrap all the way around this guy. And yeah, he's pretty cool. So 10 Hun TCG, which is what it's called at this point, he has not come up with an official name yet, is created by the YouTuber 1000, which is where he gets the name from. And he is currently partnering with a company called Creo, and they make trading card games kind of on a smaller scale, but they still do it professionally, just like the big companies do. And so all the cards, the packs, the boxes, everything is very professionally done, and everything is pre-ordered, and so they do it in batches, kind of differently than Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh would do. And so at this point, the game is about halfway done. He has finished the desert and sky biome, and he's currently working on the ocean biome, at least at the recording of this video. And so if you, off the bat, sound interested in that, definitely go check it out. He has 5 videos at the time of this video. He is not just constantly posting videos. He takes his time to really do a ton of art to pack into one recording. And this was one of the first creatures he made. Actually, this was the first one. I'll put a picture on the screen of what the actual card looks like. This was the first one that he actually inked and colored, and it turned out amazing. And I just love the emotion and colors that went into the original card, and I just knew I had to sculpt it. And I really love how I was able to capture the card into sculpted form. Now, as you can see, I used a fair amount of mediums in this. I used a bunch of different sculpting techniques, and so you're going to get a pretty good idea today of how I did that. And so I'm going to switch over to voiceover Alex so that I can look at the pictures and better explain what was going on and how I made this guy. Alright, so here we have the first picture. This was before I started on the sculpture, but you can see some of the materials I used to at least make the armature, and I, in the right side, have just a big container full of pliers, and I have a little hand drill I can use. And then below you can see I have a wooden stand. I really love using the brand that you can find at like Hobby Lobby or even Dollar Tree. Those wooden stands work really well. And then in the top left, I drew out a little picture just to sort of visualize how I want Gila to look while on the stand. I ended up not using it too much, really just for the armature phase. Then for the next picture, you can see I have the wires put into the stand. To do this, I drilled holes that were slightly smaller than the diameter of the wire, and so then I could use my pliers to really get the wire deep into that hole, and the wood would really hold it in place very firmly. And I also used a lot of super glue. At this point, I'm pretty sure super glue is fine to put in the oven if you have used it on your sculpture. I haven't had any issues with it, but I would do your own research before you do, just to double check. All the different brands of glue are obviously different formulas, and so who knows, maybe some you should not put in the oven. But anyways, you can see on the right side, I began twisting those 2 wires together because that helps make the wire sturdier. And then you'll see in the next picture what I do with the other 2 wires off to the left side. And then in this picture, you can see the extra wires I added on to be able to make the arms and the legs. And to do that, I had twisted them around the main wire, and then I used a bunch of this really skinny, like floral wire, I believe it is called. And that was really good for just wrapping continuously around and holding it firmly in place. Then I used that type of aluminum tape to seal off the edges. Anyways, it works good on sculptures. I don't know. I saw North of the Border use it once, and I was like, oh, that's a good idea. So that just helps add some additional reinforcement. And then here you can see the next stage right before I add clay on. I went ahead and added in 2 wires to support the mouth. I thought that would be a good choice because it can be really hard to work on faces if they're just all droopy. And anyways, I added in those 2 wires to help support the face. I added in a bunch of aluminum foil around the different parts of the body, and I did end up adding more before I actually moved on to adding on clay, but I don't think I have a picture of that phase. So always add in enough aluminum foil because, you know, if it gets too heavy, not only does it use up more clay, the reason I try and keep the clay use to a minimum is because it adds unnecessary weight onto the sculpture. If your sculpture is really top heavy, it will wiggle around. It will cause the bottom part of the sculpture to crack under the weight, and that's just not good. So always add in aluminum foil. It takes time, but it's worth it. Then we have the next stage, which is adding on the initial clay. On this stage, don't add detail. Never add detail when you are first adding on the clay. You will want to maybe start adding on some armor or sculpting in some scales, but I assure you that you are going to need to adjust some clay at some point, and then you'll have to get rid of all those details. And that honestly could really demotivate you and make you want to stop on the sculpture. So make sure you know that the structure and muscles and all the fat of the creature, everything that makes it look like it's supposed to, is there before you start on the details. And that's what I was doing at this stage. You can see the body, and then I also made sure to bulk out the arms and the face before I started working on the details. Here we have the next picture, and this brings me to my next point, which is use the property of clay to be able to be baked multiple times to your advantage. What this means is that if I wanted to finish bulking out the body and then adding on the initial details of the skin, I could, and then I could bake it. Then later on, I can add the armor just straight over on top of the body. I can work on the arms, I can work on the face. It will be a lot more sturdy to work on those parts because the clay is baked. And then later on, when I go to bake the arms, the legs, the armor, the face, I can still do that even though I've already baked the body. All that does is just give the body some extra reinforcement. It just bakes in another time. And you can really bake clay as many times as you want. I believe that I probably baked this sculpture about 5 or 6 times because I kept wanting to save my progress. And that's a really smart thing to do. And as I was nearing finishing the sculpture, obviously not the paint job, here is what it looked like. So this is before I added in on any of the weapons and armor and clothing, any of that. This is what Gila looked like. So I have the arms, legs, and face done. I am honestly really pleased with how the face came out, especially because, I mean, those scales took ages. How I did it is I used a little needle-tipped tool and I carved out every single scale individually, and then I would use a paintbrush to brush away all of the little specks of clay that got sort of, scraped out from the cracks, and that helped look really good. I wouldn't recommend using too much rubbing alcohol to smooth out the clay because that can make the scales not pop as much as they did on the sculpture, so keep that in mind. And then one last thing is that I added in a bunch of small scale details around the body and the arms and the legs by using a texture roller. These are very popular for sculptors to use. Lots of them do like to use texture rollers because it makes everything so much easier. You just sculpt, I poked a bunch of holes into a little cylinder of clay. Then when I roll it over the sculpture, it makes raised little half circles all over the body, which is what I was going for. So keep that in mind. Definitely try that out if you ever go to sculpt. And here's what the finished Gila sculpture looked like. It really came together near the end. Adding in all the armor and the bands around the body helped it really capture what Gila looks like in the card. And so at this point, I'm really happy with how Gila Gila was coming together. And so looking around, a couple things I want to point out. The mouth, I think, really turned out good, especially that tongue coming out of the mouth really captured the feel of Gila Gila being sort of a really tough, strong fighter, which is what the desert biome is, but also kind of having that little goofy side because his tongue is hanging out of his mouth. So I love that art choice for Gila Gila, but I also am really happy with the eyes. I used baked spheres of clay, and I put those in while I was still sculpting so that when I sculpted the eyes, they kept that perfect sphere shape. And I could do whatever I wanted to around them, and I wouldn't have to worry about them getting squished. So 100% take the time to bake those balls and put them in the eyes. But other than that, I just took my time with the armor and all the details. It's something you cannot rush. Otherwise, it will reflect in the finished product. So yes, this is where it was at this point. Let's see how the painting went. Now, to paint the sculpture, I used one of my favorite tricks that a lot of really good detailed painters of sculptures use, which is adding on a base coat of black before you do anything else. Even in areas where I knew it was going to be lighter, like the mouth would have some light pink, or the horns coming out of the back of the armor would be like a light yellow. I still decided to go ahead and paint everything black, mainly to get into all of the cracks and to highlight those shadowed areas, but also because it just helps tie everything together, and it just really makes it easier to just paint on top of it, give it something for the paint to stick to. I just always add on a base coat, and it's just too tedious to try and like do a white base coat in this area and then do a black base coat in this area. Just do black over the whole thing. And as you can see, it turned out great. It just may have taken a couple more coats in some areas than it would have if they were white. And then the first color I added on was a dark gray, and I dry brushed it over all of the areas where you could see the skin of Gila Gila. And if any of the gray got onto the armor or the straps, I didn't really care at this point. But I did that because this is really the base color I wanted the dark skin to have, or the black skin to have on Gila Gila. And then later on, I just painted the orange over the gray. And so sometimes you have to figure out easier ways to get stuff done. I didn't want to like paint an orange stripe and then paint a gray stripe and then paint another orange stripe. It was just easier to get the gray knocked out, then paint the orange stripes on later. And here's what the orange stripes look like. And so at this point, you can see they don't have those scaly details that you see in my finished sculpture. That's because to make the scales, it took a ton of time, and I went through and I put each individual dot onto the sculpture, and I will show you a picture after this one that should contain those scales. However, you can see I just was focused on getting that base layer down. Where do I want the orange stripes to be? And I painted all of the scales I wanted to be orange on the head, so those were ready. And I made sure on the head to paint the scales in the way where they didn't go down into the cracks. I wanted the cracks to remain that dark gray to highlight the shadows. But I also couldn't do a dry brush because I needed to paint individual scales. So it really took a lot of time and patience. But that's important when you're doing a sculpture like this that has a lot of details. And then at this point you can see I've added on two things, and I know the picture's a little blurry, but you can see one, I colored all of the straps and the red cloth red, and so that part was done. And then you can also see all of the tiny little dots I added on all throughout the body to act as scales. Now, when I was sculpting, I actually did add in about 30 different little balls of clay that I blended into sort of bigger scales that pop more from the sculpture, which just adds another layer of depth. I didn't need to add on too many. They were very tedious, but you can see them spotted throughout the sculpture, and they elevate it to another level. And then that brings us to the finished Gila Gila sculpture. Now, I want to talk about a few different things that I added on from this picture, from between the last picture and this picture. Obviously, we have the armor. I used a glossy paint for the armor to give it that shine, and it was the light gray you see around the edges is what the initial color looks like, so that's why the edges are more shiny, because I had to dull it down with some black that is not glossy, so that's why the darker gray isn't as glossy, but it still looks really good. Then I went ahead and colored all the horns, I colored the claws, I colored or painted the inside of the mouth, the eyes, the little golden chain coming that sits on the strap coming off of the neck. All of that was colored in. And one additional thing I decided to do at this stage was add in UV resin to the mouth. Actually, I probably had been planning it for a while, but the UV resin gave it that mouthy, glossy shine, as well as the eyes there shine. And once it's completely cured, just by using a UV light, I mean, there's no worry at all about it still being sticky. That's what's great about UV resin, and that's why whenever I'm able to, I use it for my gloss, because I can guarantee it's going to dry hard and not sticky, and it's not going to attract dust or anything like that. So I would highly recommend that for any mouth or eyes, especially eyes. It just works really well. If you have a huge slimy creature that is going to take a ton of gloss, UV resin could work, but you may want to look into an alternative. But yeah, so this is where it ended off. So that's the process of sculpting Gila Gila. I added in a couple other things that don't really relate to the actual sculpture, which is the sand on top of the stand, and of course painting the stand edges black. Just some simple stuff that I wanted to do so this would be a really cool display piece. However, I did not want to stop there, because whenever I make a sculpture, I always want to share it with the community. And with this one specifically, I wanted to edit it into some pictures that sort of reflect the original Gila Gila pictures from the game. And so let's take a look at those. I made 4 different Gila Gila pictures. I love all 4 of them. So definitely let me know what you guys think. So here is the first picture I created. Now what I did to make this picture is I took Gila Gila outside, and I put him on a white table and then covered his whole base and stand and all around him with sand, and I took the picture. I tried to make the entire desert, at least the sand part, out of real sand that I took a picture of. And initially, I thought it was a good idea, but after seeing it in the finished picture, it just wasn't really what I was looking for. It wasn't really capturing the feel of Gila Gila, especially since we know that lore-wise, these creatures are much bigger than their counterparts here on Earth, and so I knew that the sand grains being this big just did not work. So I made some other pictures. And this is the composition I landed on. It is clearly a different scale. I love the colors much better in the sky and in the desert sand. And overall, I'm just much more happy with how this picture turned out. I really was trying to replicate the colors from the original card. The other one I had created was definitely more white, light yellow sand as opposed to this dark orange sand. And so I was really happy that I made this change. And so I thought, you know, I took the time to edit this picture, why not see what it would look like in card form? And after a couple hours, I was able to see what it would look like in card form. And I'm a huge fan. I really like how the Gila Gila is able to fit within the card. His body is pretty tall, and so it really lends well to the card, which you can see in the original card as well. And overall, I just am really happy with what I was able to capture with the sculpture, with the final image, and then with the card here. Now, I did this just completely for fun. I'm a really big fan of the art style, the direction of the game, and I just was like, you know what, why not make my own custom fan card? I still have all the files saved, so as he adds on stuff to the card, because this may be an older version of Gila Gila, so it may be missing some stuff, I could always add that in. However, after seeing how good this card looked, it made me really want to take the original picture and change some things, edit some things, and create my own alternative versions of his alternative versions of his Gila Gila. So let's check out what those look like. The next card I decided to make was actually one that 1000 has not included in his TCG because he went for more of a hypnotic style to his night cards, which I absolutely love, and I also made one of those, but I did want to try and put Gila into sort of a sunset, nighttime kind of card that keeps his original colors. And I love how I was able to capture it. You can sort of tell there is moonlight reflecting off of his body coming from the left and creating shadows towards the right. I love the dark blue sky in the background. I love how I was able to get the sand to really darken and lose that dark orange color because it is getting darker. And of course, the card you can see on the right looks amazing. I love how that turned out. And here is my hypnotic version of Gila. So the first thing I did was I worked on the background. I just did a bunch of color shifts, made it purple and dark blue. And then I worked on the body, and I'm really happy with how I was able to change all the colors throughout all of Gila. And I think it looks really good, and I am a huge fan of this version of my Gila. I especially love the card form because I feel like that closed in shot of Gila really helps you focus in on the cool coloring that he has. And then lastly, we have the sculpt version of Gila. For this, I just went back and found the progress picture for the finished Gila sculpture before it had any paint, and I just edited that into a picture that I really loved, sort of the vibe it has with the wooden table, the cobblestone background or wall. It just blends so well together with the sculpted Gila. And I did a few color shifts to make it look better and to make everything flow well together. But especially if you look at the finished card, that looks amazing. You can really appreciate the just basic sculpt of Gila before it had any paint. Alright, so there are all of the pictures that I created for Gila. And that's it for the video. We've pretty much covered everything I've done with Gila for the past about 5 weeks. And I think at this point, it's a finished sculpture. I don't have much more I plan on doing with this guy, except having him on display. My plan is to make one guardian from each biome and then maybe do some other stuff as well. Just depends on how inspired I am to do stuff, but yeah, I mean, when it comes to sculpting, there really are endless possibilities for what you can create. I myself have created things from games like Clash of Clans, Brawl Stars, some VR games like Walkabout Mini Golf. I have created sculptures from other card games like KS Galaxy TCG, and that's just to name a few. And all of them I love and I've displayed for many years, and it's just a really fun passion and hobby for me. So that's why I got really into this game, because the art is just so amazing. It just blends so well together. His style is very unique, but he really keeps the attributes, the different creatures and animals realistic, while also anthropomorphizing them to make them look like warriors. And he does a great job with it. And so I think that's one of the main reasons I have really wanted to do a lot of sculptures with this game, is because of the art style. So yeah, but with that being said, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so that next time I make a 1000 TCG video, you'll be notified. And maybe by that time we'll have a name for the 1000 TCG. If you're watching this video at some point in the late future, at that point I'm sure he has already found a name for this TCG, so it won't be called 1000 TCG anymore. At that point I will change the title of the video, but throughout the video when I mention 1000 TCG, it's because that is what it was called for a while. So anyways, thanks for checking out this video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.